Okay, welcome everyone. Hi, thanks for coming. We're going to get started. Okay. So, just at the very outset, I'd like to say that since 2014, here at Ryerson, it's become a common tradition that most public events held at Ryerson will begin with a reading of the land acknowledgement statement prepared for Ryerson University by the Aboriginal Education Council. So I will begin our public gathering here by reading our land acknowledgement. That's the tradition. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So, okay, on that note, welcome, and thank you for coming. It's very nice to see such a large turnout for an important topic. Just to introduce myself, I'm Tim Bartkiw. I'm an associate professor here at Ryerson and the director of the Center for Labor Management Relations that is hosting the event, co-hosting with the Faculty of Arts at Ryerson. The CLMR promotes research and social dialogue on work, employment relations, and labor relations. Just a few words about the event, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague Bryan Evans to introduce the panel. This is an important topic, in my opinion. There's an increasing number of people working in this specific industry, food, courier, delivery work, but also in general relates to various phenomena that are increasingly important. People working in platform-based work, technologies used to organize, coordinate, control work of many people, with organizations increasingly treating these coordinated, controlled workers as independent contractors, and these organizations enjoy the privileged position of organizing work relations to some degree from the outset based on this claim about their view of the status of these workers. So we know that workers in this industry, like various others performing platform work, have been able to attempting to push back in various places, claiming status as employees under the law or attempting to unionize with some degree of success. And many of us will know that just yesterday the Ontario Labour Relations Board made a ruling that held that workers employed by Foodora in particular are dependent contractors and thus are legally entitled to unionize, contrary to Foodora Corporation's claim. Assuming that the union workers can clear all the other hurdles in the system, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about in a little while. So again, important topic, timely event. Just to say a few words of thanks as well before we begin to those who've assisted in organizing the event. So the people who helped set up the organization and technical stuff in the room, thank you very much. Particular thanks to Iván Rajwani, who led the organization at our center, our special projects coordinator. Most recently, a new entrant into the labor movement himself as the newly elected president, a very large OPSU local here at Ryerson. So congratulations to him. Thanks also to Tamar Becker, special projects coordinator with the CLMR, and Melissa Wong from the Faculty of Arts. Many thanks to Bryan Evans, professor in politics and public administration at Ryerson, and Mark Thomas, associate professor of sociology at York U. So at this point, I'd like to thank everybody again and ask Bryan Evans to say a few words and introduce the speakers.
Like Tim said, I'm Bryan Evans. I'm a faculty member here, and my job is to introduce our really phenomenal panel, really phenomenal in a number of ways. One of the ways being, as Tim mentioned, that very important decision coming from the Ontario Labour Relations Board yesterday. And tonight we have two people who were directly involved in the campaign to organize food courier workers in Toronto. And then in addition, to give it an international flavor, because this is not just happening in Toronto, it's not just happening in North America, it's international. And we have somebody here who is very much involved in a comparable campaign in Bologna, Italy. So to begin, I'll begin at the far end. And with us tonight we have Liisa Schofield, and she is a lead organizer with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, or as we call it, CUPW, in the campaign to unionize Foodora couriers in Toronto. She has been a labor, social justice, and community organizer in Toronto for 20 years, primarily through and with the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. And then we have Iván Ostos. Iván had been studying music at Humber College when he began working for Foodora as a bike courier in 2016. However, shortly after that time, he suffered an injury, a serious injury, on the job, and therefore from that injury forward, he's been heavily involved in organizing, or attempting to organize, Foodora couriers with CUPW in the Foodsters Unite campaign. Iván still makes music, albeit in a much more limited capacity, while coordinating workshops, educating his co-workers, and doing as much as he can to better the working conditions of couriers in the GTA. And then our final speaker, Marco Marrone. And I have to say, I first met Marco a year ago. Actually, Tim and I first met Marco a year ago in Bologna at a conference. And really interesting conference, but Marco made it a lot of fun. You know, it was an academic conference, but Marco made it a huge amount of fun, to the point where there are elements of my time in Bologna I really can't recollect. But hopefully everything turned out fine. So Marco holds a PhD in Sociology of Economics and Labor from the University of Bologna. In the past, he has been in Toronto. Toronto's not new to him. He was a postdoc at the Global Labor Research Center at York University, working under the supervision of Mark Thomas, who is here tonight and helped organize the event that we're having. He is currently a postdoc at the Department of Sociology at the University of Bologna, and there he's working on a project entitled Platform Labor and Urban Spaces, which is a project financed by the European Union. He has obviously published books and articles on precarity, focusing on such things as internships, casual and informal labor, and new forms of unionization. He's on the editorial board of Alternate Routes, and is a scientific director of Fondazione Claudio Sabatini, which is named after a very well-known, popular metal worker unionist in Italy. He is not just an academic, obviously. He is an academic and an activist, and he played, why he's here tonight in particular, is that he played a role in the formation of the Riders Union in Bologna and contributed to negotiations that they were part of, and in terms of dealing with how they would be regulated through the local government.
Thank you Brian, thank you team, thank you Mark for organizing this, thank you all of you guys to be here, and also thank you to Iván and Liisa, and congratulations for what you have achieved, because it's a very important achievement that definitely gives energy to this that looks to be a global struggle, that of the workers. What I'm going to present is the result of the participatory research, let's call it like that I've been involved into since the autumn of 2017. That it's when Riders Union Bologna, that it's these informal unions representing food delivery workers in the city of Bologna was formed. So what I'm going to talk about is more or less the organizing practices and the strategies that we have achieved, that we have adopted in order to achieve basically our right to unionize, and also to get our respected the rights of the workers. So this is the first, comes from the first strike we had, and I'm just going to translate it for you, and says, a pizza is not worth the risk. Of course, pizza is the main food that is delivered in Italy. A pizza is not worth the risk, no more deliveries without rights, and it was very effective images, and received a lot of shares on Facebook, and made this struggle very popular and attracted the media attentions. But before going into the point, I just wanted to bring some points about what we mean with platform capitalism. First of all, I mean, we knew it's like look at these two images are from The Economist, and the other one is from the one on the right is from 2011, and the other one is from 2013, and we see it's like how at the very beginning there was very much of an enthusiasm about what was happening with the digital platforms. So the idea that no more property relationship were necessary, no more hierarchies on the workplace, and so you don't need to get a job if you want to. You can rent a house, you can rent a car, you can even rent a dog. That's what the Economist was saying. A couple of years after, you know, the sensibility about this topic was totally different. We see Workers on Top was what The Economist, that it's not definitely not a socialist magazine was titling. But so what platform means? Some people argue that platforms, and like platform as well, argues that they are just simple intermediators, mediating between the demands and offers, so without actually having any direct involvement in labor relationship. Other people says that actually platforms are emerging as a distinct model, that it seems to be oriented actually to be hegemonic in the future economy, and it's the idea basically of getting together both the market and the openness of the market, but also the hierarchy of a company. But another point that was interesting while we were organizing and were discussing is where platform comes from, because definitely food delivery has not been invented by Deliveroo or Foodora. Actually, in Italy it was a very common informal activities that was happening at the urban level. And so we see how basically through digital means somehow capital keeps accumulating, keeps bringing activities that once were happening at a local level, and where people were somehow looking for surviving needs, and entered into the global dimension. We also know that the way in which they work is not as far as other model of organization that we have seen in the past. Let's think about what has happened for the outsourcing companies. So looking at this perspective, digital technologies have been used to accelerate this process of outsourcing and reaching the single task, but also the fragmentation of labor that somehow allow to avoid the regulations that have been made over companies. So definitely the relationship with the past is something that is important also in the struggle as well. For example, one of the main claims that we were bringing was also to have a minimum of hours of guaranteed hours. And it's something that, for example, we got from dock workers. Okay, so it's like this is somehow, sometimes I'm just stressing these points because sometimes we look at this as something totally new, but it's actually, still our capitalist dynamics. We just see them in new forms and in new tendency. One of the most problematic tendencies is definitely that the Chernyshek calls the Great War of Platforms. So it seems that these platforms are competing until they will reach a monopoly. That's more or less also what makes them brutal somehow, not say managing a labor relationship. And this is, for example, some data coming from Orbis Bulovandik, that is a database that considers the balance sheet of the companies. I just selected 4 of the main food delivery companies operating in Italy, but worldwide. That's Just Eat, Foodora, Deliveroo, and Glovo. As you can see, while the operating turnover is basically increasing, like Foodora had as an operating turnover at a global level of 300,000 of US dollars, and now it's going to 2 billion of it. But the final balance is still red. It's still negative, while the net worth is increasing as well. Why? How is this happening? This is a very aggressive model that the literature defines as a growth before business. So the idea is that you keep growing even if you are not getting any profit from the business you are doing. And if you see, it's the same of also what is happening for Uber. Okay, it's like these companies do not get any profit. Everything they get, they are basically using to invest and to enter into new markets and to penetrate into new markets. So and a crucial role in these is also being played by financial interest. Okay, so this is, for example, for the 4 platforms, the first 25 shareholders. And we see that it's something interesting. We see JP Morgan, we see Deutsche Bank, we see a lot of private investment funds that somehow they were also responsible for the financial crisis. And this gives an interesting point because we know that somehow what the financial crisis of 2008 has produced, the workforce that has produced, was very much necessary for platform to rise and operate. I mean, you need people who wants to offer somehow work in that way, and that was a massive one. So somehow these funds that they were very much the author of the financial crisis are now the ones who are getting benefited to it and are leading and somehow boosting this platform economy. This is true not only for food delivery platform, or all kinds of platforms. It's also other interesting combination, like for example the relationship between Foodora and Glovo. No? It's like Foodora, for example, is shut down in Italy. Okay, they say that we're not interested anymore. They are focusing on north of Europe, and they have been bought by Glovo. While in the north of Europe, Foodora has bought Glovo. So you see that there are somehow these Chinese boxes going around, because at the very beginning everyone was somehow trying to enter in the market. Now, it's like companies are somehow trying to decide on where to focus. So for example, Italy Delivery is the one that is basically taking the leadership somehow of the food delivery platform. But so going into the experience of Riders Union Bologna. So first of all, I must say that we have defined, the union itself, we have defined as a urban-based coalition, because it does not simply involve food delivery workers, but there are students, scholars, and not the only precarious academics somehow that also has engaged in this struggle. It's like it was interesting at the very beginning when we were writing the first leaflets, since the condition of precarity was somehow the same, sharing also with those who were not food delivery workers. In this case, the point was like, if you change the name and remove food delivery workers from these leaflets, you still get a sense. You can also put precarious academics, and you have somehow the idea of companies trying to avoid somehow to respect the law, the intensification of labor, a lot of the effects that we were contesting. So the other crucial role for organizing was actually, since it is a very difficult environment to organize, it's like worker comes and goes, so it's very difficult actually to get and collect all of them. We started to use digital means of communication somehow on the other way around. So let's say, for example, at the very beginning, platforms had this chat they used to communicate with workers, and what we did is basically we made a parallel chat with all the workers without those controlling from the platforms, and so this is how basically the organizing process somehow started. At the very beginning, there was a very, very anti-union environment, which is of course still very much going over there. But the first strikes, for example, workers decided to protect their identity, okay? And so they decided to use masks of cycling sports heroes. Okay, now this is, of course, the point is that it is a very popular sport in Italy, okay, biking. So definitely that was somehow communicating something, and the idea was not simply to protect the identities, but also to overthrow the labor rhetoric that platforms were using. The first strikes has been in Italy, in Turin, Foodora in 2016. The day after, the CEO of Foodora Italy said, "Why are you striking? This is not a job. No one can live with such a wage. This is a hobby, a new form of fitness you are doing so while getting a small salary." I'm not inventing anything. I mean, it's very popular in the newspaper, no? But so this is just to say somehow we got fun about that, and so we started to wear masks of this sport hero. But probably the most crucial instrument we used, the tool we used to organize workers in this environment was that of mutualism. Again, this is anything new. Okay, this is something we got basically from first 20th century unions. That was very common, especially in the south of Italy among peasants. And so we started to organize the social meetings, like after the work, like to meet in one of the spaces, the social centers that basically were supporting the struggle. You see, that's a map of Bologna, and the red spot are those activist hubs that somehow provided shelters or bike repairing shops or legal info points. So food delivery workers could enter into this map and know where they needed to go. So that was very necessary, again, in an environment where workers comes and goes somehow to get a reference point to organize. I just go quick on claims because I've realized that actually it's like our claims are very similar, despite the different legal systems with Canada, but they are very similar, so I'm sure you heard a lot of it. So the main argument was basically that of getting recognized as subordinate workers. So that was the main claim, you know, to get that kind of a recognition. But another point that it surprised me on the similarity with Toronto is also that the first concern, more than wage, more than anything else, was about safety. It's about safety because this is a dangerous job. It's a dangerous job going into the city. It's a job that a lot of people do somehow also while doing another activity, might be a musician, an artist, and something like that. And so when you got a risk, when you are injured, then it's something serious, you know. And so it's like the first claim was like, I'm just quoting one of the workers, and it was like, okay, we can starve for a little while, you know. We can close our belt a little more. But you know, if you break your arm, if you cut your foot, then your life is screwed. You know, you need to find a job you can do with just one hand or something like this. So that's a serious stuff. And the other point was definitely that of wages, but mainly the refusal of the piece work payment system, because that was another way in which somehow the possibility for workers to get a better salary is related to their availability, and they're willing to accept to put their life on risk. The recognition of a workers' representative, but also to stop the wild recruitment. In these days, there is a trial in Italy happening on the discriminatory behaviors they had after that we organized a strike. Because after we organized the first strike, basically Deliveroo hired 100 new people on a total of 300 food delivery workers active in 4 platforms in the city of Bologna. So basically the message was clear, you know, we can change the entire workforce from day to the other, you know? So it's like we don't need you. Then of course also the composition somehow changed. At the very beginning, most of these workers were basically young Italian students, okay? Now right now you see that migrant workers are taking the stage, no? So basically, you know, it's like while we were organizing, while we were somehow establishing a stable counterpower inside the platforms also changed, you know, to make strikes ineffective and to undermine our action. But probably the crucial point of this experience is the relationship with the city, okay? So now I don't want to go too much in this, maybe we can discuss this later, but definitely the way in which platform is restructuring economy is making emerge the city as a crucial ground, not only of accumulation, as I was talking about before, but also as a ground to organize resistance, okay? The resources that the cities, as in this case that Bologna has provided, were crucial to get this done. That's because at the very beginning, after organizing strikes, we realized that even if strikes were successful, even if we could shut down the services, that wouldn't go so far, okay? The way in which platforms are organized makes strike more ineffective than it is for other traditional sectors. So it is good to build up somehow class subjectivity, class consciousness. It is good for media relationship, but do not really harm platforms, okay? And so we decided somehow to, since we realized that the symmetry of power so much that it was impossible to condition it to the behavior of platform, we decided to target public opinion, okay? So now think about the city not as an agglomerate of people, but think about the city as an ideological construct, you know, that we somehow making appear by naming it, okay? So we're saying, oh, Bologna can't accept like platforms coming and getting into it, you know? So basically, we decided to use our power as to influence voting more than that actually of influencing the behaviors of the platform, to condition it first the local government, then national government, to put pressures on over platforms. This means that we also had to invent new practices so we used more social movements kinds of practices, like name and shame. During Black Friday, we were going to name and shame Deliveroo, naming Slaveroo, and stuff like that. And so we started to somehow reclaim the city in this case. And so we were under the mayor, we were under the city local council, saying you need to act, you need to stand for these things, you need to stop this injustice. And somehow it worked. It worked, and it has led us to sign the Bill of Rights of Digital Workers in the urban context that we have signed in May 2018 with a local platforms that is named Unionize, is an Italian food delivery platform, and later has been signed also by Domino's Pizza. Okay, which is important because then now, for example, we are going for a trial against Domino's Pizza by using these things, and this is an interesting case because it's a document that somehow a contract we assigned on a territorial level, so it's not a national one, it's from the city council, but it is allowed to bring all food delivery workers for the platform who has signed it, because it needs to be voluntary signed, on a general level. Then after this, the government actually got interested into this topic. The Ministry of Labor at the time was Luigi Di Maio from the populist movement, Five-Star Movement, decided to basically call us. You see there is a picture of him with us. And basically we started to have a negotiation at national level that has went from June to November 2018, where digital platform didn't show any opening, any interest into getting into a national contract, even if the whole government was somehow pushing for this. So at the end of the negotiation had failed, and the government has approved a law at the end of 2019 where the status is basically similar to what has been said by the entire court a couple of days ago. So food delivery workers are entitled to get the rights of a full employed, even if they are not as such, okay? At the very beginning we were more ambitious, I would say. It's like what we were saying, I don't know, this might be a point of discussion, is that it's evident the economy is changing, and subordinate employed are not anymore those who are organized, or their work is organized in space and time, but all work is made for someone else's benefit, okay? So we're saying that all people working for someone else's benefit, despite the way in which labor is organized, needs to be entitled of subordinate of this kind of a right. Okay, and it is.
Right.
Thanks, Marco. So my name's Iván Ostos. I'm a Foodora courier and an organizer with Foodora United. So I'll talk a little bit about the context we're working in, and then I'll kind of trade off with Liisa and then go back to me to do my spiel. So it won't be exactly 15, but I'll make it work. So the way Foodora works, I think, is worth explaining, because how can we talk about the sharing economy or gig economy if people don't know how this is a job? So in Toronto, the way Foodora works is you have shifts, and those shifts come online every Wednesday at different times based on your priorities. So if you're a top priority courier, it'll be 10 a.m. If you're middle, it'll be 11, and if you're at the bottom of the tier, it'll be 11. And so all those shifts for the following week, they come online. It'll say like next Monday, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. or next Friday, 6 p.m. to midnight, something like that. And you just have to grab it, and then that's your job. Now you have to sign on to the app for that time and do deliveries during that time. You're allowed to drop shifts within with 24 hours notice without consequences. If you do it less than that, somebody has to grab your shift, otherwise you're on the hook for it. If you don't show up, that's a no-show, and that'll go towards your priority. So if you keep no-showing, well, it's tougher to get shifts. The way it works now, upon being on schedule, is I'll be sitting there, they know my GPS location, my data is on, I receive an order, and the order says, is this restaurant going to this place? The details that they've given us has changed a lot over time, but that's how it works about nowadays. And I'll decide to accept or decline that order. Let's say I accept it. I then have to go to that restaurant. It tells me the order, the number, so I can validate that it's the correct order. It tells me the items in it. It tells me how much it is. So then I pick that up. I go to the customer. Gives me their contact information, gives me their address, hopefully their buzzer number if they don't forget it. Happens more often than you think. And then I go deliver the food, give it to them, I say it was done, and boom, I did my first delivery. So your pay from that is calculated as such. Every order you get $4.50. Then you get $1 for every kilometer traveled between the restaurant and the drop-off. There's no compensation for time, and there's no compensation for going to the restaurant. The only other factor there may be is getting a tip, because that's pretty common in North America. We tip people who serve, but it's not so common with couriers anymore. It used to be very common. Probably 40% of my income was tips back when I started. Now it's probably 10% or less with Foodora. So, what is this company? Marco obviously talked a bit about Foodora, but Foodora is a big multinational corporation that is part of another corporation called Delivery Hero. So Delivery Hero owns a bunch of other companies across the globe. In Latin America, in Europe, here, they're all over the place. So the brand Foodora is active in only a few countries, Canada and the Nordic countries nowadays, but Delivery Hero is all over the place. And the way they model their business is changed across these different countries. In Canada, their business model is based off a company they bought, a startup in Toronto called Courier. And now, even today, if you go to certain restaurants, you'll see they have an orange sticker with like a bicycle on it, and it'll say Courier. It means they basically have Foodora. Well, maybe not anymore. Maybe they got tired of it. But so they basically got that model for payment and somewhat of the scheduling from Courier. They based it off it. They changed it over time, but that's how it works in Toronto, and they spread that across Canada. So that's in Montreal, it's in Vancouver, it's in Edmonton, it's in Ottawa, and that's how it works here. It's not necessarily how it works everywhere else, but that's how it works here. So the reason why I got involved with unionizing Foodora couriers is basically I started doing this job while I was in university. So I was studying at Humber College. I was studying music, an industry that's very lucrative nowadays. So I decided to go for an even more lucrative industry, being a bike courier. Basically, I thought the job was so great, so awesome. I thought it was really well paying. Mind you, at this time, minimum wage was $11.50, and I was making probably $18 an hour doing Foodora. So I thought this was great. Over time, though, I became more aware, and having started it being a casual job to becoming more of my full-time job, and not really having any other options in terms of work, I started to really care about my job and where it was going. And I noticed that Foodora was making things more restrictive. It was getting tougher to get shifts, it was getting tougher to drop the shifts, the wages, the tips were going down, meanwhile rent was increasing, cost of living was going up all the time. So it was basically going downhill. And I started talking with a lot of my other friends who are Foodora couriers who were also part-time or full-time like myself, and we all sort of relayed our similar concerns. And, you know, a lot of people thought that, well, even if those concerns are valid, I don't think we could do anything about it. Or they thought that that basically it wasn't worth trying, or that you know, they'd never organized something like this before, or even other couriers who had been active for a long time have been through other campaigns with unions and didn't trust unions, or they thought they couldn't unionize couriers. It was just a model of employment that just could not be unionized. All that going on, I'm still riding my bike until 2018 in September when I broke my arm. So I was doing a Foodora delivery and basically got in a collision with another cyclist. I had to have surgery. I was off work for 4.5 months, and for that time, I was entitled by Foodora with what we have in Ontario called WSIB, which stands for Worker Safety and Insurance Board. So that means that companies, or rather employers that pay into that, their workers are entitled to get compensation for when they're injured at work. Sounds great, right? The thing is, this model that WSIB is based on has not changed to accommodate gig work. It hasn't changed to accommodate people like me who do this kind of job. And what I mean by that is, basically around the time when I was injured, I was making about $800 a week doing Foodora. But when I got compensated by WSIB, and mind you, what they said was I was entitled up to 85% of my income, they gave me $200 a week at the end of it. And this was after a lot of phone calls, emails, miscommunication happened around Christmas time. So it was a really, it was a tough time. And that really opened my eyes to how bad these things could get. And I'm somebody who I consider myself pretty frugal, pretty financially savvy. So I saved up a lot of money just for a situation like this, because everyone who told me I was doing this job told me I was crazy and I was going to die. So it fed into my ego that I should probably take care of myself in case something like this happens. And I did. And then at the end of it, I was losing all my money, even with the $200 that was coming in weekly. Finally, I had to go back to work in January of 2019. You can imagine how fun that is, on your bike in Toronto. And then we were getting together with CUPW. So I took it upon myself to give myself more up for this kind of organizing, because the reality is I didn't see a way that things could improve without it. I thought it was a moral imperative that people start to organize, and I thought it was basically the only way for my own and my friends' survival for the long run, because the crux of this all is we talk about gig work, we talk about part-time, casual work, whatever. People don't leave these jobs. There's people who do all the time, they come and go, but they don't actually leave. Because what happens is, you meet a guy on the street, they say they've been doing Foodora for a few months and they love it or whatever, and they find another job later maybe, and they leave Foodora. Then they get fired from that job, so they go back to Foodora. Or they can't find another good job, so they keep doing Foodora, and they're still looking for another job while they're doing Foodora. And then that's been going on for years. Or they are on disability, so they don't want to get another job, because then that disability gets taken away. So they'll do something like Foodora on the side, not saying that they have disability. This kind of goes in the background, right? This job attracts people who are in that precarious nature. So that's why it's kind of funny to me whenever anyone ever says to you, why don't all the Foodora couriers just get a better job? Where are they? Like, who's hiring? What, am I qualified to get your job now that I've been a bike courier for 4 years? I studied music at Humber. Yeah, that's the reality. And that's the reality for a lot of students. That's the reality for a lot of internationals. They can't get a better job in their field, so they have to get this job. So when it comes down to it, how can you improve your life without trying to change your job when you're in that situation? You can't go find another different job. So this is the only real option I see. So I'm going to invite Liisa just to talk a little bit about CUPW and the Canadian context of these kind of challenges.
Can folks hear me okay? Yeah? So Ivan's going to come back up in a few minutes. We're going to just trade back to talk about the campaign when we went public and the recent decision from the Labour Board and what that means for the union and for the couriers. I was just going to give a little bit of a background on the beginning parts of the campaign and how the union got involved and how we got to the stage here. Just in terms of like, why does CUPW take on this campaign? Because we always get asked that question. And a lot of people are like, why did you take on this campaign? Like, are you totally out of your mind? I definitely heard that from several sisters and brothers, mostly brothers in the labor movement. Wow, you're really, okay then, good luck. To which I was like, yeah, thanks. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Challenge accepted. So I think part of the decision to take on this campaign from the union was, we were approached from a group of couriers who were already meeting, a small group of folks who were meeting as a committee and approached us. And I met with them in December of 2018, and then they made the decision in January of 2019 to join CUPW. And we went from there. And so it hasn't actually been that long of a time, that we've been on this campaign. The turnover has been quite fast. For those of you who have some experience in union organizing, you'll recognize that that is a very short turnaround, a year. So a year to this point, really. And so part of the decision was really about, twofold. On the one hand, building density and power within the delivery and logistics sector. That's something that CUPW cares about, obviously. Coming from public postal workers, we also have a lot of folks in private sector delivery and private sector logistics, which is something that's not really well known about CUPW. We do have bargaining units in private sector delivery. And so the idea of building union density and power within delivery and logistics is part of the politic of the union and part of the focus of the union, absolutely. And another piece of that is, I think that, smartly people are seeing that this app-based delivery model is coming everywhere, right? And so we're seeing in the US, for instance, and it's coming to Toronto, it just got introduced in Toronto, a system called Amazon Flex, right? Which is an app-based delivery model for the delivery of Amazon packages. And that's a direct threat to public postal and to the delivery, the parcel delivery that CUPW members deliver, right? So looking ahead and being able to see that, how do we organize in this sector and how do we bring these workers under the roof was important. And then of course on the other hand was the solidarity aspect, right? Like what unions should be doing, obviously, is constantly organizing, always organizing precarious workers, always bringing up the floor. The saying of, rising tide raises all, rising waters raise all ships. Mm-hmm. And if we're seeing a downward pressure on wages, and in public postal we've seen that for sure, and then for postal workers we've seen that pressure coming from Canada Post, right? And if we're not organizing precarious delivery workers from below, how are we fighting against that, right? And so it's from that solidarity perspective also. So just in terms of the Canadian context, so some of the challenges we faced going into this campaign. So couriers were until yesterday defined as independent contractors. And so that means essentially self-employed, and we can go through a little bit, Iván can talk about a little bit the rhetoric that a company like Foodora likes to put out, and I think Marco talked about it, what you call it, flavor. Yeah, just like be your own boss, ride your bike, so cool, you're so cool. But really,
we are.
yeah, you but definitely like ignoring the intensity of the labor and attempts to try and survive in a city like Toronto on those wages, right? And then there's the broader issues of misclassification of workers in Ontario, which is a plague really happening in Ontario of misclassification of this, you know, everybody's their own boss, everybody's an independent contractor. There's really no, especially under Doug Ford, we lost some meager measures that we had to try and bring back the misclassification plague. And so the onus remains on workers to define, to prove that they are in fact workers, and it's not on the employer to prove that they are workers or independent contractors. So it's a huge plague of misclassification that's happening, and a lack of provincial laws that's stopping this. And that's something I put a challenge to Ford, and I put a challenge to the NDP and the official opposition to really bring that forward. Is how are we gonna, and we've seen laws coming forward in California and elsewhere, right, but to try and keep back Uber and those kinds of companies and companies like Foodora. So that's the context of here. Also, of course, the lack of card check certification in union organizing. So, you know, we have to, especially in this sector, that you have to do, you sign cards, and then you have to submit the cards, and then you have to have a vote in such a dispersed workforce. It's a nightmare, right? And truly unfair to the workers. It's also a huge workforce. There's no central workplace. It's very dispersed and very diverse. So, you know, we're not talking about one central site where there's one factory, one warehouse where you can get everyone in one go. We're talking about the entire city as the work site, and there's no gathering spot for every courier in the city. There's no place you can go to be like, we're gonna catch somebody we know for sure, we're gonna get every single person. And so that was a huge challenge that we faced, and I'm gonna talk about in our strategies that we use to try and tackle that. There's a combination of drivers, and so this might be different, I think, from Italy, but there's a combination of drivers and riders, and e-bike and moped and every vehicle in between, walkers even now. It's a short distance. Rollerblades, yeah. There's every vehicle you could imagine at play. And then you have the combination of part-time, full-time, casual, super casual, all across the board, right? The other challenge was that no one had done this yet in Canada. No one had done it yet in North America in this way. And so there was not only a lack of legal precedent, which is extremely daunting going into this, but there was also a lack of, nobody had written the organizing manual on this. And so we were sort of flying blind and making it up as we went along, which actually ended up being quite inspiring and quite a positive thing, I think, because you get to bring in other models, right? And you get to be like, what are folks doing in Italy? What are folks doing elsewhere? How do we bring that here, and how do we get creative about our organizing? There's also, you know, as Iván said, there's a lot of anti-union sentiment or suspicion. True in every campaign, absolutely, but definitely harder to tackle when you're in such a dispersed workforce. And then there was just sort of the negativity about, you know, the societal and even internally within the labor movement negativity about it's impossible. This is impossible to do. We just need provincial and federal legislation to deal with the problem. There's nothing else you can do. There's sort of that negativity. So despite all of those hurdles, and despite all of that, all of those challenges, we took it on. And so I met with a group of couriers, as I said, in December 2018. And so we had to develop, immediately we started card signing, and we wanted to move quickly to card signing. And we had to develop creative strategies to find people, and we were still underground at this point, and still very quiet, and building the committee in the typical form that you would in a union campaign, of recruiting people slowly but surely to a committee, signing cards, moving forward from there. But when you talk about like mapping a workplace, finding leaders, all of those are like, how do you do that in this workforce, right? It's very difficult, but we found a way, and we built the committee and we moved forward. And we did a lot of creative tactics that we brought in from, I think, a lot of, like you talked about, social movement strategies and community organizing strategies of training up couriers themselves to have organizing conversations on the streets. with couriers. And so we developed a model of an organizing conversation that varied in length between 30 seconds to 5 minutes to potentially half an hour if you got a sit-down coffee. So 30 seconds would be a stoplight conversation, stoplight organizing conversation. So in 30 seconds, and I would dare anybody in this room to try this, in 30 seconds, can you get someone's phone number? Can you get their full name? Can you get them to say the word union? 30 seconds.
Wow.
And talk about some issues that they're facing in the workplace. To 2 minutes, so like a bike lockup or somebody paying for parking. So that would be like a 2-minute conversation. 5 minutes following them into the restaurant, following them out, to a full sit-down coffee if you could convince them to go for a coffee with you. Or in some cases, what some of our organizers did, and what I did a few times, was ride along with a driver. You'd be like, hey, can I hop in the car with you to your next spot, to your next drop? And then you get to have a full 10-minute conversation with somebody. And that was a good recruitment tool. But those were kind of the strategies we employed. And camping out at some busy restaurants and waiting and finding couriers and just waiting and approaching people awkwardly and and identifying people either by the pink bags. People carry the pink Foodora bags, you'll probably see around the city. Not everybody does. Some people use their own bags or different bags. And so you follow, hey, you working Foodora right now? Oh, hey, me too. Start a conversation. But you can imagine how much legwork that takes and kind of the army that we needed in place in order to do that across the city. And so that was something we had to really train people up on and put a lot of resources into. So we grew quietly between January and May. And then we collectively decided to take an approach that's pretty non-traditional in a campaign, is that we went public before submitting cards to the Labour Board. And so we went public with our campaign on May 1st, employing again that sort of social movement strategy and putting the debate to the public. You know, what are the rights of gig workers? And what does the public think should happen too? And you help us find couriers, and you help us talk to couriers. And so we had a flood of people coming in through that, and we put up ads on TTC, and we were able to step up our outreach strategies in a more visible way. And so we would camp out in key intersections around the city with our big banners and running up to couriers and huge teams of people across the city. And then we did something called order-in days once we went public, where we actually asked allies and people who cared about gig economy workers in the city, order in Foodora, go ahead, maybe it's no boycott under place. Order in Foodora, then talk to your courier about the union, then pass that contact on to us. And then we will follow up with them to sign a union card. And that was huge. You wouldn't imagine how many people did that in the city, how many allies were like, hell yeah, we want to be involved in this, we want to do this. And so we got a huge amount of numbers that way, especially in outer zones where it's a lot harder to find drivers. They're not as visible, you know, they're not visibly biking around the city. And people are working in huge expanses of land in Mississauga, and so it's harder to find people at specific spots. And so that was a huge strategy in being able to find drivers, was ordering days. And so I'm going to pass it back to Iván to talk a little bit more about going into the vote, because that was a very exciting time.
Loads of fun.
So low. Yeah, so that basically the organizing that was underground, I don't think Lisa touched on this, but this was very secret, right, for a long time. So from when we started with CPW last year in 2019 of January until May 1st, when we went public, it was, we didn't talk about the U word, we would call it. Like, we didn't say union, we didn't, like, if they said union, that's great, because then you know they're on your side. But we could never bring it up, because, you know, we didn't want to give somebody who may have anti-union sentiment or be uncomfortable with that kind of word, you know, scare them off right away. We want them to start talking about their issues and what they feel could be improved and what they want to do about it before you even get there, and then they can warm up to that kind of thing. So until May 1st, this was all hidden. May 1st comes, we go public, which means we had a press conference and said we were trying to unionize with CPW, and we get a lot more couriers who have not heard of us, obviously, following up with us. And then we can be more open about the campaign. Then we can talk about the U word and have open conversations about unionization, have those right in the street, right at the restaurant. We collect enough signatures then by July 31st. So there's a few more months of collecting signatures before we file them. So then what happens when you file them is you have all those, you present a list saying that this is 40% or more, because that's what you need to file for certification. You have to give that to Foodora and you have to give that to the Ontario government. It's basically saying that you've reached a number to have a union certification vote. So that was a pretty awesome day, because we actually just got like 35 couriers to show up to Foodora's main office with that package in the room where all the dispatchers are, all the big guy, David Albert, who is like the managing director of Foodora Canada, deliver it to him personally. My friend Tom delivered it to him, and in that room, give it to him and leave. It was pretty like powerful. Those kind of actions, you'd be surprised, because they really don't want you to walk into their office like that. So we do that, we deliver that package, and then a couple weeks later in August, we have that vote. Now this vote was unprecedented in Ontario history because it was online, totally online. There was no physical location to poll. And it was for 5 days, I believe. It went from Friday to Tuesday, by Friday at noon to Tuesday at noon. So there was lots of time you just had to log into this thing and say whether yes or no, whether you want to join a union or not. Now here we are in, what month is it? It's still February. And we still haven't had the certification on the union. Well, why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. So that vote that happened, even though it went forward, the two things were, we already touched on one, we're independent contractors, therefore don't have the right to unionize. So that was Foodora's first argument. Let's just throw this whole thing out because you guys can't even do that. Now they lost. But they have another trick. The second one is, well, you guys didn't get 40%, because Foodora has a massive long list of all the couriers that work in the GTA, basically ever, and said we didn't get the 40% of that. Now the thing with that is, that list includes people who haven't worked in 2, 3, 4 months, a year plus. Includes people who work in the office, like the management, the dispatchers. It included names that we couldn't even find this was a real person, like they were just fake names, which is a pretty common tactic with, I think.
Logistics demo.
Logistics demo was one of the names. Not a real person, obviously. We tried to follow up with them. So the tricks like that. So what is about to happen now is now that the independent versus dependent issue is settled, it will be now before the courts whether we got 40%. So it's going to be argued these different people need to be taken off the list or not. And then once we settle that, did we get 40% or more than 40% or more or not? That's what's about to happen right now. During the vote, Foodora really took out its guns, because we were really prepared as soon as we went public that Foodora was going to try to hammer us with all sorts of anti-union propaganda. We were prepared for them to put up some sort of fight, but they really didn't say anything. They didn't release much of a statement. until we finally filed for certification. So what happened when we filed is that Foodora started using its power, its advantages on the couriers. And what that was sending push notifications. So I was literally working, doing my orders, and then I would get a notification from Foodora. I think I have an order. No, it's Foodora telling me not to vote for the union. Get an email saying basically like, you know, a union will cost you, I think the number they pulled out was like $1,100 a year, which totally came out of nowhere. Things like that to try to scare people who wouldn't know better legitimately from voting for the union. Now, we then filed what's called an unfair labor practice, which is when employers are not allowed to do those things. You're not allowed to basically impede your workers from joining a union. You're not allowed to tell them those sorts of things. But the reason why Foodora gets away with it is they could do that push notification, which is kind of on the line. It's like, oh, it's their own opinion. It's not them really telling us those kinds of things. And then the damage is already done, right? The vote already happens. And then we have to fight for that thing to be the unfair labor practice later. This is the unfair labor practice after we get the 40%, after it's basically going to be dealt with many months from now. So, you know, in that time, a lot of people could have voted no against the union because of that propaganda, which is unfortunate. So it just goes to show you that even with the legal framework we have now, we're still on. It's not equal. It's far from equal. They have a lot more power, right? They know all of the couriers. We don't. They have information and contact for all the couriers, and we don't. We have to go into the streets and talk to them, have those conversations about unions and stuff. They don't have to do that. So there's a lot of advantages these employers have, but that being said, we have our own advantages like face-to-face conversations and real people like me can talk about this. The decision yesterday. This is important. So the decision yesterday that we are dependent and not independent contractors, what does that mean? Independent contractors are people like, I think in the decision he even said it himself, Wilson. It's like carpenters and plumbers. They are their own boss. They show up, you negotiate how you want to do the work, and you pay them accordingly. Whereas a dependent contractor is somebody who is integrated into the business model. Somebody who depends on the business to sustain themselves. Independent contractor, well, plumber could go to some other person to get a job. You could just fix somebody else's toilet. I can't go to a restaurant and say, hey, I want to deliver food for you. That's not how it works. I'm working for Foodora. Foodora has to give me that order. They have to give me the contact information. They own the app. I can't edit the app. I can't change the app. That's proprietary to them. I depend on that app to do my work. I depend on it for my living. So that's why it's that was probably one of the largest issues for the dependency. Now I read through the decision last night. It's like 40 plus pages. It's free online. Anyone can read it. I'm sure if you look it up, OLRB, Foodora, something like that, you can find it. This decision is groundbreaking, not only because it's in our favor, but it was like not even close. Like there wasn't really one point that Wilson agreed with any of the points Foodora was making. And virtually every single point Foodora made, one of which was, you know, we provide our own services, we provide our bicycles, our cars, we maintain those things, that's our job, therefore we're independent contractors. Even that he threw out the window because virtually everyone knows how to ride a bike or drive a car in Canada, one or two of those things. It's not a special skill. Having a cell phone, I mean, most people here probably have cell phones, right? You know, it's pretty easy to download an app. These aren't special skills, is what it comes down to, and anyone can do it. So this precedent that has now been set basically will now make it a lot easier for other workers in Ontario, and for that matter within Canada, to basically be reclassify themselves firstly as dependent or even employees, depending on what they're going for, and have basic protections like the right to unionize, like minimum wage, like your employer contributing to EI and CPP, which I'm sure the young people in this room don't really care about, but you should, because it's going to matter when you get older. I know I felt that way when I started. I was like, oh, this is great. They're not taking money for the government. No. That's good. You want them to pay that because you're paying twice as much if they don't pay it. Think about it. So that's a big deal. How do I mix this up? So next, I talked a bit about what's called the 8-1 challenges, which is when they flooded the list with fake accounts. And then hopefully we'll get to open the ballot boxes. Now this will take a few months, but while all of this is going on, I think Lisa already touched on this, doesn't mean we're just sitting around waiting for court to start again. Court's really boring anyways. So we're still actively campaigning. Mind you, Foodora is still hiring all the time. So we still have to reach those new people. They might not even know about the union. They might, even though we do all this promotion and I do these beautiful talks, whatever, people still haven't heard of it. So we have to reach those people. Well, how do we reach those people? Same thing we've been doing this whole time, just constantly organizing, which is kind of a good and a bad thing. Good because, you know, it kind of keeps our chops up. Bad because we all get really tired. But it's kind of a healthy, I think, process that keeps us active. Lastly, I'll say that, you know, this is kind of I think it's going to be a new era from now on in terms of gig work. And we talked a little bit, I think Marco especially, about how, you know, their strategy was to push local government to change laws because, you know, that was the best way for them. Well, who's Premier of Ontario? I don't know if he's going to change any laws in our favor. And I don't know about Trudeau really stepping in either. Like, we live in a system wherein the politicians in place don't have a lot of incentives to really listen to labor. So what do? Well, in this 1 year, we've done a whole lot. And in a 4-year term of a majority government, you can't do anything to change who they are. So the way I see it is just simple math. You can do a lot more to better your workplace by organizing it, by having those conversations, by talking about issues, by forming a union. That obviously union takes a long time still, but it's a lot, I would say, a more surefire way than depending on every 4 years you got to vote for this person and then they might lose still. You know, I don't like the idea of depending on politicians because politicians come and go and their motives could be whatever. So if you organize yourselves and you keep going with that organization, you build connections with your coworkers and friendships and you build skills. I'm a lot more skilled than when I started doing this a year ago, better at speaking, better at having this organizing conversation. You will have a way better shot at improving your workplace and the livelihood of yourself and other people. So I guess I'll close this by saying, you know, if you ever thought about changing the workplace for the better, I think 2020 is the year to do it. I don't think we have time to wait anymore with environmental catastrophe looming. I don't think we have time, you know, to depend on governments that we find untrustworthy. I don't think we have a lot of time, so, you know, you could wait or you could try to do something about it, and I would like to try to do something about it, so.